the first thing Mara stole was not the roast pheasant or the sugared pears. It was a heel of dark bread no noble had touched. She wrapped it in cloth, then added 2 slices of plain venison, a cup of thick broth sealed inside a small jar, and a handful of fever-safe herbs from the kitchen drying rack. She moved quickly but not carelessly, checking each item before lowering it into the sack hidden beneath her apron. Mara, her hand stopped. Head cook Bryn stood in the pantry doorway, broad shoulders blocking the only exit. His gaze dropped to the sack. For 3 nights, food had been disappearing after the Alpha King's evening meal. Nothing valuable enough to make sense. No wine, no silver, no imported sweets. Just meat, bread, broth, and ordinary herbs. By dawn, Mara was standing before Alpha King Rowan in his private receiving chamber. Elder Corvin stood to Rowan's right, already wearing the expression of a man who considered the matter settled. She has admitted taking provisions from the royal kitchens, Corvin said. Repeatedly. That is not hunger. That is organized theft. Rowan looked at Mara. She kept her chin level, even though her pulse hammered beneath her skin. Did you take the food? Yes. Corvin made a quiet sound of satisfaction. Rowan ignored him. For yourself? No, then for whom? Mara's fingers tightened around the edge of her apron. She had expected punishment if she was caught. She had prepared herself for losing her position, perhaps even being driven from the palace district. But she had not prepared for this question, because answering it could endanger people who had no strength left to run. I can't tell you. Corvin stepped forward. Your Majesty, that refusal is proof enough. No, Rowan said. The elder fell silent. Rowan studied Mara again. You admit taking royal food, but you refuse to name the recipients. Yes. Why? If I tell you before I know what you'll do with that knowledge, I may cause more harm than I already have. That changed something in his expression. Not trust. Attention. He glanced at the inventory list Bran had provided. Bread, venison, broth, dried willow leaf, fever mint, salt. Rowan tapped one finger. Against the page. You never took coin, wine, silver, or anything easily sold. Mara said nothing. Corvin frowned. A thief is still a thief. Perhaps. Rowan folded the list. Then he gave an order Mara did not expect. No arrest. No guards following her. No one interferes. Corvin turned sharply. Your Majesty, that is my decision. That evening, Mara returned to the kitchen. She packed another sack. Bread, broth, meat, herbs. Then she slipped through the servants' gate and headed away from the palace. She never saw the Alpha King leave the shadows behind her. Mara never looked back. She crossed the sleeping market quarter, past the last stone houses reserved for palace workers, and kept walking until the lanterns along the protected district thinned behind her. The road narrowed into an old service path choked with weeds. Rowan followed far enough back that even a cautious wolf would have struggled to catch his scent beneath the damp night air. Mara left the path twice, cutting through abandoned courtyards before reaching a row of workers' houses that should have been empty. One window held a faint light. She knocked twice, paused, then knocked once more. The door opened. Rowan moved closer. He expected smugglers, perhaps servants trading palace provisions outside the district. Instead, he heard a child coughing. Through a cracked shutter, he saw Mara kneeling beside a thin mattress. 3 pups lay beneath patched blankets. 2 adults occupied the opposite wall, both visibly weakened. Mara unpacked the sack. She did not divide the food evenly. One pup received broth in small spoonfuls. Another got softened bread. She stripped fat from the meat before giving a portion to the oldest child, then crushed fever mint between her fingers and measured it into warm water. Every strange choice on the kitchen inventory suddenly made sense. Rowan pushed open the door. Mara spun around. The spoon struck the bowl. For one instant, fear emptied her face. Not fear for herself. You followed me. Rowan's gaze moved across the room. Who are they? People who need food. That is not what I asked. And their names are not yours to use against them. One of the adults tried to rise, then sank back against the wall. Rowan stared at Mara. Why aren't royal healers here? Her expression hardened. Because according to your officials, these people no longer exist under your protection. The words landed harder than an accusation shouted in council. Rowan looked toward the children again. Explain. This house was part of a sanctuary. They received basic food and medicine through palace provisioning. Then the deliveries stopped. When? Several weeks ago. And you reported it. I asked why. Mara's voice remained controlled. I was told the sanctuary had been terminated. Everyone here had been classified as exiled, and anyone supplying them could be punished for violating exile law. Rowan went still. He knew the law. He also knew a sanctuary could not simply disappear because one official decided to stop feeding its residents. Who told you that? Mara shook her head. I'm not giving you another name until I know what happened. You think I ordered this? I think your seal means very little to a starving child. Before Rowan could answer, a sharp gasp came from behind her. The smallest pup curled suddenly beneath the blanket, trembling so violently that the wooden frame rattled against the wall. Mara was beside him instantly. Hold the lamp. Rowan obeyed before either of them seemed to realize she had given the Alpha King an order. Mara touched the child's forehead, then his throat. The fever climbed. What do you need? The broth. Not the meat. Rowan reached for the jar. Slowly, she warned. If he takes too much, he'll lose it. He crouched opposite her, holding the lamp while Mara cooled the pup's face and coaxed tiny amounts of broth between his lips. Minutes passed before the trembling eased. Only then did Mara look up. Rowan was still holding the light. These are the people I stole your food for, she said quietly. Rowan looked from the exhausted pup to the nearly empty sack between them. No, he said. Tomorrow we find out who made you believe you had to steal it. Tomorrow arrived before either of them had slept much. By first light, Rowan had ordered food and basic supplies delivered to the house. Without announcing why, he did not send royal healers yet. Until he knew what authority had been used against the sanctuary, a visible palace intervention could expose its residents before he understood the danger Mara had been trying to avoid. Then he and Mara returned to the palace. She expected to be dismissed to the servants' quarters. Instead, Rowan took her to the records chamber. Elder Corvin was already waiting. You found where she was taking it, he said. Rowan stopped at the archive table. I found people who were supposed to be receiving provisions. Corvin's face remained composed. Not after their sanctuary status was terminated. Show me. A clerk brought forward the registry. Mara stood opposite Rowan while he turned through the pages until Corvin indicated an entry marked with the sanctuary's location. Terminated. The classification beneath it identified the remaining inhabitants as exiles. Mara felt her stomach tighten. Rowan read the authorization twice. At the bottom of the entry was the royal administrative seal used under his authority. Corvin folded his hands. The record is clear. Rowan's jaw hardened. Mara watched him, searching for the smallest sign that he had known. She found anger, but not recognition. That seal makes this lawful, she asked. Corvin looked at her as though a servant had interrupted counsel. It makes your conduct unlawful. You knowingly supplied classified exiles with provisions stolen from the crown. They were starving. That does not erase pack law. No, Mara said. But perhaps someone erased something else. Corvin's eyes narrowed. Rowan looked at her. What? Mara stared at the termination date. Something about it bothered her. She had spent years carrying kitchen inventories between storerooms, checking herb bundles, counting jars, and watching old tally sheets become scrap paper when a season closed. Most nobles never saw those records. Servants did. This date is wrong. Corvin gave a humorless laugh. On what authority? None. She leaned closer. On memory. Rowan waited. Mara pointed to the entry. If the sanctuary ended here, why were its provisions still appearing afterward? Silence settled over the table. Corvin spoke first. You have no evidence that they were. I saw the notation. Where? On an old kitchen inventory. It was being discarded. There were sanctuary allocations listed with the winter broth orders. Rowan turned to the clerk. Can those inventories be retrieved? If they were archived, Your Majesty. And if they weren't? The clerk hesitated. Some kitchen tallies remain in storage before disposal. Corvin stepped nearer. Your Majesty, we are allowing an admitted thief to challenge an authenticated royal record because she claims to remember a discarded inventory. Mara looked at Rowan. For the first time since he had entered that house, she understood the trap facing him. If he ignored the registry merely because he believed her, then royal law meant only whatever the king preferred in a given room. Rowan closed the book. Mara has until tomorrow morning to produce the record she remembers. Corvin stiffened. And if she cannot, then you may bring the charge formally. Mara met Rowan's eyes. One night, One chance to prove that a servant's memory was stronger than a document carrying the Alpha King's seal. The kitchen storage room smelled of flour dust, dried herbs, and old paper. Mara knelt beside a stack of wooden crates while Rowan stood at the work table sorting bundles of discarded tallies by date. Midnight was approaching, and the one-night window he had given her was shrinking. "This one?" he asked. Mara glanced at the sheet. "Royal table." He put it aside. "This?" "Guard barracks." Another sheet. Rowan frowned. "You remember all of these?" "I remember what passed through my hands." "That is not the same thing. It is when someone blames you for every missing jar." She reached for another bundle. Rowan almost smiled, but Mara had already turned away. An hour later, she found it. "Here." The paper was stained along one edge with broth. Mara flattened it beneath the lamp. A sanctuary allocation appeared beside the winter kitchen orders: grain, preserved meat, fever mint, willow leaf, salt. Rowan checked the date. It came after the termination recorded in the royal registry. "That should be impossible," he said. "It isn't. Impossible. It happened. One record proves a contradiction." "Not what?" Mara looked at him. "Then we find the others." Rowan led her into the restricted provisioning archive, where seasonal orders were stored separately from kitchen tallies. Mara followed quantities while Rowan matched authorization numbers. By the time the lamps burned low, they had found more entries. The sanctuary had continued receiving allocations on paper after it supposedly ceased to exist. Not one order. Several. Mara traced a finger beneath the figures. They kept assigning food and medicine. Yes. But none of it reached the house. Rowan's expression tightened. "That is what we can prove so far." Mara stared at the provisioning authorization. Corvin controlled these records. The answer seemed suddenly obvious. He took it. Rowan looked up. "We do not know that. His office controlled the supplies. He defended the termination record before we even started looking. That makes him relevant. It does not prove he diverted anything. You're protecting him." The words came out sharper than Mara intended. Rowan went still. "I am protecting the difference between suspicion and proof." "Is that what you call it when the suspect is an elder? And what would you call it if I condemned him tonight because you are angry?" Mara stepped back. For a moment, the quiet room felt like the house beyond the district again, except there had been a sick child between them then. Something simple to do. Here there were only records and trust neither of them fully possessed. "I saw those pups," Mara said. "I watched food disappear while officials told me helping them was a crime. Forgive me if I have less patience for procedure. I saw them too." "Then act like it." Rowan's voice lowered. "I am." Before Mara could answer, footsteps sounded outside. An archive clerk appeared at the doorway carrying a collection order. "Your Majesty." Rowan took the document. His eyes moved once across it. "What is this?" "Routine disposal. Obsolete provisioning records are being transferred at dawn." Mara looked toward the shelves they had not yet searched. "How much?" The clerk hesitated. "Most of the older sanctuary files." Rowan turned toward the rows of records. Mara understood immediately. Their first proof had shown that the official story could not be true. But somewhere in those shelves might be the proof of who had made it false. And at dawn, it was scheduled to disappear. "Then we start with the files scheduled to leave first." Rowan set the disposal order on the table and summoned the archive clerk back before he could disappear down the corridor. "Nothing from these shelves is destroyed until I review it." The clerk bowed. "Yes, Your Majesty." Mara was already moving. They divided the remaining sanctuary files between them, comparing dates against the kitchen tally she had found. The first bundles gave them nothing but old requests, delivery totals, and routine corrections. Then Rowan stopped. "Mara." He placed one ledger beside the termination entry they had brought from the registry. The dates overlapped. Even after the sanctuary had supposedly been terminated, food and medicine continued to be assigned to it through the provisioning system. Mara checked the quantities twice. "This is more than the kitchen tally. It confirms the allocations continued. But not that they arrived." No, they searched deeper. Near the back of another bundle, Mara found a separate classification record. She carried it to the lamp. The sanctuary designation had been changed. Not merely its supply status, its legal status. Mara felt the pieces she had been holding rearrange themselves. She had believed Corvin was stealing food from people the law had already cast out. But if the sanctuary classification itself had been altered, the question was no longer simply where the provisions had gone. Someone had made protected people appear unlawful to protect. They didn't just take the food, she said. Rowan read the page beside her. His face became unreadable. They changed what the sanctuary was. And once they were listed as exiles, anyone who questioned the missing deliveries could be threatened with the law, including her. Rowan placed the two records side by side. We still do not know who authorized both actions. Mara looked at the documents. For once, she did not argue. Her accusation against Corvin had outrun the evidence. The provisioning record showed continued allocations. The classification record showed a separate alteration. Together, they proved that the official history of the sanctuary did not fit. They did not yet prove whose hand connected the two. I was too certain, she said. Rowan glanced at her. I thought his control of provisioning meant he had done all of it. He may have, but we prove it. Yes. The answer should have irritated her. Instead, it steadied something between them. Mara looked down at the royal authorization marks scattered across the papers. You didn't know? No, that doesn't make this harmless. I know. She studied him, waiting for the defense that usually followed those words. It never came. Rowan touched the edge of the termination record bearing authority derived from his seal. If someone used my government to erase them, then ignorance does not remove my responsibility for what happened afterward. Mara said nothing. Footsteps approached rapidly. The archive clerk returned, pale and breathless. Your Majesty, Elder Corvin has filed the charge. Rowan straightened. Tonight, he requested immediate formal proceedings on the grounds that the accused has been given access to royal records after admitting theft. Mara understood the move instantly. Corvin did not need to destroy every page if he could make the person finding them look untrustworthy. When the clerk swallowed. The preliminary hearing has been called for morning. Mara looked at the surviving ledgers beneath her hands. By dawn, she would no longer be a servant trying to prove that a sanctuary record was false. She would be an accused thief asking the pack to believe evidence she had been allowed to touch. By morning, Mara stood in the preliminary hearing chamber, wearing the same plain servant's dress she had worn into the archives. Corvin stood across from her. He did not begin with accusations she could deny. He began with facts. Mara removed royal provisions repeatedly without permission. She concealed their destination when questioned by the Alpha King. She crossed beyond the protected district and supplied individuals officially classified as exiles. Each statement landed cleanly because each was true. Corvin turned toward the council table. Now, after admitting these acts, she asks this council to accept records she personally handled during a private investigation conducted with His Majesty. Mara glanced at Rowan. He sat above the chamber, but there was no easy command he could give that would erase what Corvin had just done. The surviving ledger rested on the evidence table. Corvin pointed toward it. She worked in the royal kitchens. She knew the inventory system. She had access to discarded tallies. How can any discrepancy she presents be treated as independent proof? Mara's stomach tightened. He had not disproved the ledger. He had made her proximity to it dangerous. Rowan rose. I can pardon the theft. Corvin's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Mara turned sharply. No. The chamber went silent. Rowan looked at her. A pardon ends the charge against you. Only against me. She looked toward the records. The sanctuary would still be listed as terminated. The people inside it would still be exiles under a record we already know contradicts the provisioning history. Mara, if you pardon me now, he gets exactly what he wants. Corvin stiffened. She faced Rowan fully. Everyone will say you protected your maid because you followed her, believed her, and gave her access to records. Nothing changes for the people I was feeding. Rowan held her gaze. What are you proposing? Mara felt fear rise before she answered. The location of the house had been the one thing she had protected from the beginning. Once spoken publicly, she could never hide it again. Put me under the hearing. A murmur moved through the chamber. Corvin smiled. Mara continued before courage could leave her. I will give the council the sanctuary's location. Inspect it. Confirm who lives there and when their official deliveries stopped. Her throat tightened. And in exchange, I want the original provisioning seal chain inspected. Corvin's smile disappeared. Mara saw it. So did Rowan. She pressed on. Not copies. Not summaries. The original authorization records tied to the sanctuary classification and the provisions assigned after its supposed termination. Corvin stepped forward. An accused thief does not dictate the scope of a royal inquiry. No, Rowan said. He descended from the raised seat. But she may request evidence relevant to the charge against her. He stopped beside the evidence table. The pardon is withdrawn. For one painful second, Mara understood exactly what she had chosen. If they failed, she remained the admitted thief who had now exposed the people she had tried to protect. Rowan faced the council. The sanctuary location will be formally inspected. The original provisioning seal records will be secured for review. Until judgment, Mara's charge remains active. Corvin's face had gone still. Mara looked at Rowan. He had not saved her. He had done the harder thing. He had allowed her to risk herself on the truth she had chosen to prove. And now they had to find it. The seal records were brought into the hearing chamber under the archive custodian's supervision. Mara was not permitted to touch them. This time, she was grateful. The custodian placed the original sanctuary termination authorization beside older provisioning orders whose authenticity was not disputed. Rowan stood at the evidence table while Corvin watched from across the chamber. At first, Mara saw only wax impressions and administrative marks. Then she leaned closer. Wait. The custodian looked at her. Can you place that one beside the winter allocation? He did. Mara pointed without touching either document. The inner edge. Rowan narrowed his eyes. What about it? The provisioning seal on the termination record bends inward beneath the lower mark. The older one doesn't. Corvin scoffed. She is now an expert in royal seals? No, Mara said. I carried supply orders for years. I saw that impression every time stores were released. She looked at the custodian. But I cannot authenticate it. The custodian examined both impressions, then requested 2 more verified records. The chamber waited. He measured the marks, compared their edges, and finally straightened. She is correct. Corvin's face tightened. The impression attached to the sanctuary termination does not match the authorized provisioning seal used on these records. Rowan's voice was quiet. Who had access to the seal? The custodian opened the custody register. During the relevant period, controlled access belonged to the provisioning office. Corvin stepped forward. An office contains clerks, assistants, and record keepers. It does, Rowan said. The custodian continued through the register. The altered authorization fell within a period recorded under Corvin's departmental control. Then came the allocation trail. The food and medicine assigned to the sanctuary had continued moving through provisioning accounts after the sanctuary was classified as terminated. Those accounts were also administered through Corvin's office. Mara felt the evidence settle into place. The false classification had made the residents appear forbidden to help. The continuing allocations had kept resources moving after the people meant to receive them had been cut off. And the seal record connected both mechanisms to the office that controlled them. Corvin's voice sharpened. This proves administrative irregularity. It does not erase her admitted violation. He turned toward Rowan. The exile statute remains active. Until judgment is complete, she should be detained under the law carrying your own authority. Silence followed. Rowan looked at the termination record bearing the corrupted impression. Then at Mara. She did not ask him to rescue her. She had already chosen the hearing. Rowan turned to the council. Effective immediately, enforcement of the sanctuary ruling is suspended pending review. Corvin stared at him. You cannot discard law because it has become inconvenient. I am not discarding it. Rowan removed the royal seal ring from his hand and placed it on the evidence table. I am submitting every use of my authority connected to this ruling for formal council review. Until that review determines which orders were valid, no disputed sanctuary classification will be enforced against Mara or its residents. A murmur spread through the chamber. Mara understood the cost. Rowan had not declared himself right because he was king. He had placed his own authority inside the same examination he demanded of everyone else. Corvin could no longer use the disputed record as an unquestioned weapon without also defending how it had been created. Rowan met Mara's eyes. There was no command in his expression, no demand that she believe him. For the first time, he had given her something stronger than a promise. He had made trust cost him something. The formal hearing resumed with Rowan's seal ring still resting on the evidence table. No one could pretend now that the question concerned only a maid and a stolen sack of food. The archive custodian began with the sanctuary records. The original designation showed that the house beyond the protected district had been established under royal sanctuary protection. No valid order in the surviving chain lawfully removed that protection. Then came the altered termination record. The custodian identified the mismatched seal impression and confirmed that access during the relevant period had been controlled through Corvin's provisioning office. Corvin remained standing. Access is not authorship. No, Mara said. But it is only one part. She faced the council. The sanctuary stopped receiving food and medicine. I know because the people there began depending on whatever I could carry out of the kitchen. Corvin's mouth tightened. Which you stole. Yes. Mara did not look away. Because the provisions legally assigned to them were already going somewhere else. The custodian opened the surviving allocation ledgers. The entries continued beyond the false termination date. Grain, preserved meat, broth supplies, medicinal herbs. Month after month, resources remained assigned to the sanctuary on paper while none reached its residents. The administrative trail passed through accounts controlled by Corvin's department. The sanctuary inspection completed after Mara disclosed the house confirmed the other half of the chain. The residents matched the protected sanctuary population, and their deliveries had ceased despite those continuing allocations. Corvin turned toward Rowan. You are allowing circumstantial records to destroy a lifetime of service because this woman broke the law and then invented a justification. Rowan did not answer for her. Mara stepped closer to the evidence table. I did break into stores that did not belong to me. I hid where the food went. I refused the king when he asked me to name the people receiving it. She looked at the altered record. But the law you say I violated depended on those people being lawful exiles. The chamber was silent. They weren't. The custodian confirmed it. No valid termination authorization existed. The classification used to criminalize assistance to the sanctuary had been manufactured through an altered administrative record. The continuing allocations proved something equally damning. The sanctuary had remained inside the provisioning system even while its residents were denied what had been assigned to them. Corvin had no answer that reconciled both facts. The council ordered him stripped of provisioning authority and rank pending judgment for falsification of protected records and diversion of royal provisions. Only then did Rowan speak. Mara's theft charge cannot stand on a sanctuary classification that had no lawful foundation. He paused. That does not make secret theft a system of justice. It proves the lawful system failed badly enough that she believed theft was the only way to keep people alive. His gaze moved to the council. That failure also occurred under my seal. He did not blame Corvin and stopped there. Rowan accepted the council's review of the authority exercised in his name and ordered verified food, medicine, and healer access restored under the sanctuary's legitimate designation. Mara felt no sudden triumph. She thought instead of a small room, an empty sack, and a pup trembling beneath a patched blanket. The truth mattered because tomorrow, that sack would no longer have to be filled in secret. Across the chamber, Rowan met her eyes. This time, there was nothing left for him to ask her to prove. Weeks later, Rowan walked the same road he had once followed through darkness. This time, he did not hide his scent or keep to the shadows. Mara walked beside him. The abandoned workers' quarter no longer looked entirely abandoned. Smoke rose from the chimney of the sanctuary house, and fresh supplies stood beneath its covered entrance. The pups were recovering slowly under regular food and healer care. No miracle had erased what weeks of deprivation had done, but no one inside was waiting for a stolen meal anymore. Rowan carried a cloth sack. Mara glanced at it. You know there are people who can carry that for you. I have been informed. And I chose not to listen. That sounds dangerously familiar. He looked at her, and the brief smile between them felt easier than anything that had passed between them inside the palace. Corvin had lost his rank and administrative authority and remained subject to judgment for the falsified records and diverted provisions. The council's review of Rowan's seal had also forced changes closer to the throne. Sanctuary classifications could no longer be altered through the same unchecked administrative chain. Mara had asked for no reward. Rowan had offered one anyway, not a title beside his. Work. I want you involved in the sanctuary provisioning review, he said as they approached the house. Mara stopped. As what? Someone who understands where the records stop matching what actually reaches people. That is not a position. No. I assumed you would tell me what the position needs to be. She studied him. Weeks ago, that answer would have sounded like a king passing responsibility downward. Now she knew the difference. I would need access to the original supply records. Agreed. Authority to inspect deliveries without permission from the provisioning office. Agreed. And if I find something wrong, I report it directly to the council as well as to you. Rowan paused only a moment. Agreed. Mara resumed walking. You are becoming easier to negotiate with. I was hoping you might say wiser. I wasn't. They reached the doorway where Rowan had first discovered her kneeling beside a feverish pup. He set the sack down but did not release it immediately. There is something else. Mara waited. What happened between us began with suspicion, he said. I will not pretend my rank, my wolf, or anything else gives me the right to decide what it becomes. Her expression softened, but she did not rescue him from the uncertainty. If there is anything between us, she said, trust cannot mean I stop challenging you. I know. It cannot mean obedience. I know that too. And if I say no? Rowan released the sack. Then I accept no. Mara looked at him for a long moment. Good. She reached for the other handle. Then you may walk with me and see where it goes. Together they lifted the sack. Stamped across its inventory tag was the restored Royal Sanctuary seal. Mara remembered another sack beneath her apron, hidden from guards and carried along this same road because telling the truth had seemed more dangerous than stealing. Now she carried the food through the same doorway in daylight, with the Alpha King beside her. This time, she did not have to hide it.